Welcome to Cloudy with a Chance of Trust, a podcast for digital transformation leaders where we discuss the latest cyber attack issues, enterprise security strategies, and current security events so that you can successfully accelerate network and security transformation. And now, here's what's on our mind this week.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Cloudy with a Chance of Trust, a podcast for technology leaders with listeners in over 50 countries. And I'm your host, Pam Kubiatowski. Today, it's awesome to have Zscaler's own CIO, Praniti Lakhwara, here with us today. Prior to Zscaler, she actually was the CIO at Conga, where she was responsible for infrastructure, application, security, and data platforms. And today, she's been charged with enabling Zscaler with the tools it needs to serve as the world's largest security cloud. Praniti, welcome.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited that we're doing this.
Me too. And before we jump in, if it's okay, I really do want to explore your philosophies behind being a CIO at a cybersecurity company and one of the largest clouds in the world, right? And what some of those unique challenges you have found and how you approach that delicate balance between security and enablement, because so many, I think, are struggling with that today in what they're trying to achieve. But before we talk about that, first, I think this is so interesting. Is it true that at a time growing up, you actually wanted to be a pilot?
It is true. That's why I came to the US. I wanted to be a pilot. I grew up on an Air Force base. My dad was a pilot. I was surrounded by flying. And so I was always drawn to it. But it wasn't to be. Pam, you know what they say about the best laid plans. Fast forward 25 years, and here I am doing something completely different that I had never imagined I would be doing.
It's crazy how life just has a path of its own for you, right?
Yeah.
So talking about your role here at Zscaler, being the CIO here, a lot of times CIOs are perceived as the bad guy or the head of the department of no. I imagine decisions about allowing employees what tech they can access is incredibly difficult. Can you walk us through a little bit about how you make those decisions and what sort of factors do you weigh in when you make those decisions?
Yeah, Pam, I mean, you did say a lot of the times, and that is so true. You know, I would have stopped you if you had said some of the times. We are definitely perceived to be the department of no. Having said that, I think one of my guiding principles in IT has been to make every desk more productive. But it's also, like you said, balancing security and privacy with that productivity. So we want to orient our colleagues to do more higher value work. We want to remove friction from their day. These can be sometimes small transformations and sometimes large transformations. You know, I mean, it's not often that you get stopped in the hallway as a CIO and you're given a compliment versus a help desk issue to solve for. On the other hand, I mean, and so there are those feel-good moments that you bring to the employee base, right, to your colleagues. And that's why we're here. But there are, you know, on the other hand, there are decisions that are made that makes pockets of people unhappy. And when we think about productivity, we need to consider the productivity of the whole organization. We have to create an appropriate portfolio. We have to develop an understanding of which initiatives have the potential to drive most value for our organization. You've got to think of your priorities as an org, as a company, like influence ACV, margins, driving collaboration across the company, creating data integrity to inform better decision-making. These are the outcomes that we're striving for. And that's the reason a lot of the decisions we make are oriented towards these outcomes. And that can make some people unhappy. You know, how do you drive down margins? That's going to create some unhappiness. But this is where CIOs are creating a platform strategy. They're putting in governance, they're standardizing all things that can go to feel like it's Big Brother making decisions. But it does help us enable outcomes. And that's really why we're here. So while you can't make everyone happy, what I think is really important is you show people why you're doing certain things, why those outcomes matter to us as an organization. And so there's a funny story here that I will talk about. Okay, when my husband and I got married, we had different tool preferences. What did we use to store our pictures? Where did our documents go? how we managed logistics in our own individual households had to suddenly be combined into a singular household. And we suddenly needed to collaborate on a single set of tools to make our lives more efficient. And one of us had to drop our preferences. I'm not going to say who. I think you can read between them.
I can only guess.
But that's how we can best run a house. And I don't see companies differently. Change is important. Being agile is important, but let's do it together so we can actually collaborate effectively.
So that's really interesting. I love that analogy. That is really a great analogy because when you look at it, you were the CIO, your husband was a CISO. Because I know there's some listeners out there right now thinking that. It's this fine balance, this dance. Yeah. And it doesn't matter who reports to who, right? In some organizations, a CISO is a peer of a CIO. Some organizations, the CISOs report up to the CIO, right? But it's really an interesting thing. And a lot of the CISOs are also sitting there thinking, okay, Pam, you said the CIO is the bad guy. Well, usually it's security, the CISO being the bad guy, right? But when you actually do that dance, it's a dance, right, between the CIO and the CISO. How do you go ahead and how do you intersect with our CISO here, Deepan? Are you finding times where you guys are sitting there saying, okay, whose tool are we going to use? What are we using for our pictures? Do you find that relationship here at Zscaler with Deepan?
I say this to a lot of my CIO peers that I have at Zscaler found the perfect, we perfectly dance between the raindrops, Deepan and I. And I love working with the CISO team. I think there is a ton of collaboration. We push each other as we should constructively. And normally the charters are so different. You don't find this in every company. The charters for a CIO and CISO roles are different. How we are measured to performance is different. While the CISO is in charge of managing cyber risk and sometimes can be viewed as more conservative, the CIO is being looked to help to scale and grow the business and the technology stack to keep up with the business growth, in a really accelerated fashion. So the keyword is fast, speed to value. That's the CIO's charter. So having said that, I do believe this is converging. Most CIOs are in charge of enabling tech to protect our assets as well. And Deepan and I have truly converged that strategy. We're very aligned on that goal of a high security posture. And we created a collaborative approach, not just between the two of us, but between our teams, which is super important. So we collaborate on planning to adoption, and even earlier in the frameworks of reviewing processes and policies. And Gen AI was a great example of that. It came at us very fast. We had to do policy creation across all of our groups. We had to review processes for third-party risks. We had to enforce Zscaler and ZIA policies quickly so we didn't have data loss. And the ability to respond that quick really came from the fact that we have a one-team approach. So there's really a lot of learning and influencing that occurs. And so while the CIO org learns how to slow down a little bit to be more secure, the CISO org learns about balancing productivity to risk. Mm-hmm. And so I would like to say we're one big happy family here.
That's great. And I'm kind of chuckling here because I'm like, one big happy family. At times, yes, and other times, right? There's the, hey, no, I'm using my tool. But no, there have to be checks and balances, right, between a CIO and a CISO to make sure that the best interest of the company is always the first thing on everyone's mind, which here at Zscaler, my goodness, everyone is so passionate about the company, the tech, our customers, right? And securing all of that.
And I think that's what I mean when I say one big happy family. We have our tugs, we have our tussles, we have constructive tension. We question each other, yet you get aligned and you move forward in a well-balanced manner.
Right. That's awesome. You actually touched on AI, and it's on everyone's mind. So it's perfect time to actually touch on this relative to your thinking, because, it is something that a lot of organizations are looking at. What are their suppliers doing with AI, and what are they going to do with AI relative to their products going to market and so forth. So can you talk a little bit about some of the major issues surrounding AI adoption from a point of view of a CIO or from your perspective?
Pam, as a CIO, I have to say that AI presents an incredibly exciting opportunity to us. Instead of demonstrating value to a few super users who know how to work on a tool or who know how to access the right data, who know how to interpret the data, we can now democratize tech and data and bring the same value to every user. It goes back to my making every desk more productive. It's so important that we can give people time back to strategy. So it supercharges our automation efforts. And I think CIOs probably the world over are extremely excited about that. But you talked about major issues. If we want to truly solve for scale, we need to keep our eye on the ball and focus on the mindset that embraces end-to-end thinking, consistent architectural principles, over siloed solutions. You talked about every SaaS, partner of ours is coming up with their own AI tooling. If we start to sort of disperse this tech without thinking through the outcomes, without having the end-to-end in mind, we're going to create a more dispersed footprint. And this happened at the onset of SaaS too. This is where we go back to saying, how do we sort of create a platform architecture? How do we know what is the right size a tool that fits our needs? And so that is important. And that is going to be one of the issues surrounding AI adoption, I believe. I think the other item is it seems very natural to sort of address areas that are very loud and visible, meaning the impact of AI is immediate, it's noticeable, but sometimes incremental or too narrow. So if the application doesn't drive large enough value, it may not have long-term impact on an org or our goals. So we want to make sure that we look critically at build, at buy, at extendability, and a repeatable use case that will deliver that ROI. I think the last item that I would say, which is very important, it's an issue that all of us are dealing with, is about data. It's not just the volume of data. It isn't just the right sources of data. It is really integrity of data. Does it have good, high integrity that can allow the right insights to be driven from it? And so that is definitely a hurdle, because as you're looking across your landscape of data, you may have good integrity data in one application, yet not in another. And you need to make sure that you actually do some pre-steps ahead of moving towards Gen AI for that solution and enrich that data source and create a governance around it. And so that is definitely another issue.
Well, it's interesting because when you look at it, AI and the data presented from the ability to do AI, right? It's all about what systems are running, what's happening. And, Jay Chaudhry, our CEO and founder, has been known to say it's all IT at the end of the day, right? So how is our increasing reliance on tech changing the CIO role? Because it's all about enabling remote workforce, COVID, empowering employees with AI assistance, and we could go on and on, right? How are you thinking about that?
Listen, Jay is completely right. I actually think of IT leaders as architects of the business versus administrators of point solutions. And I think that shift started a while back, and it continues even more with the advent of AI. COVID brought it to light. The pandemic really brought that to light. We have the unique vantage point of looking across. Joining these dots are much easier for IT leaders. And then you add to the fact that in tech companies, we also have the buyer's lens. I talked about the end-to-end thinking. So it allows us to think of the whole versus all the other stakeholders that naturally gravitate to thinking for their departments. And that's normal. Today, every business is a digital-first business. We're living in a hybrid environment with the pandemic behind us, thankfully. Talent war that requires more dependency on system and application-based solutions. Our data footprint is getting larger. It increases the need to analyze and harvest insights. And we also have high geo-based compliance requirements. And did we mention security risks? That's become the norm. So
Right.
while IT used to operate in the background, CIOs now are at the forefront of innovation and driving that digital first strategy. Not only are we good, or at least well-versed in technology and how fast it's evolving, we have pivoted much more to business first conversations. And that's why I always talk about outcomes. We want to figure out why we want to do what level of digital transformation. It's not just about transforming business from a tool and technology stack perspective. It's about driving to outcomes and creating value.
So you touched on something, employee retention. And I forgot the word, Praniti, you used, but basically attracting the right talent. So many organizations are struggling right now with retention and attracting the right employee of their future, right?
Yeah.
The company's future. And technology has become so in the forefront, in addition to the base product that company creates. But it's also something that I see so many that are, looking for their next gig, let's call it. They're looking at what is the tech that a company is providing? What is it that will attract them and retain them? And technology is very much part of all that. And so you and I actually previously, we had a fireside chat at one of Zscaler's inaugural, it actually was the inaugural Women in IT Summit. And one of the things we talked about was challenges and benefits of drinking your own champagne and the importance of being our own customer zero, right? With our own technology we're providing. Can you talk a little bit more about how your organization goes and ensures that Zscaler itself continues to adapt technology to enable the business to actually attract that new talent and keep growing the business, right? It's that balance.
I mean, Pam, firstly, I have to say I've been lucky enough to be customer zero multiple times in my career. And when we were talking about customer zero, we had touched on this. We've got to create confidence in our own services. We've got to create confidence in our own platform, in our own solutions. And there's nothing better than employing them within your own organization. It truly signals the walk the talk. And a CIO of any company is constantly thinking about cyber threats. We're thinking about hardening our posture against the bad actors. And that's definitely caused some sleepless nights for me too. At Zscaler, one of the advantages I have is a full access to that leading cloud security platform and using that to its potential. This also puts us in a position to be that feedback loop. And I will talk a little bit about the rest of our tech stack too, in adoption and innovation, but it's really important to know that not only do we drink our own champagne or walk the talk, we're not just doing it at the tech level. We're now providing feedback to our engineering and product organizations and our support organizations. We're pressure testing early releases in a production environment. We're influencing forward-looking product roadmaps. And in some cases, we've spent a lot of time envisioning a product and sharing requirements with our product teams. And moving away from product, when I first got to Zscaler, I asked for a technical account manager in the support org. And it was brilliant because now we had our own TAM, just like every other customer. And not only does that help with the mindset or situate us like any other customer, but it also helps with feedback loop to my own team, the team that is enabling support operations. So if we are following that process that we're asking all of our other customers to, that means we're going to our own support portal that is enabled by IT. And we're able to now give feedback to our own IT organization. And I think this is a win-win-win situation for us. So I felt like that was important for me to point out that this is not just feedback to product. This is feedback to IT as well.
It is really important because you're our customer zero. So you're experiencing what any of the customers that would actually decide to transition to Zscaler would experience, right? How important that is. And so, as you're explaining this, and I think this is so interesting, and it's wonderful to hear that we drink our own champagne in the manner and how you've explained it, all aspects of the experience and the use of the technology. Some of our listeners, though, may be sitting out there saying, oh, So how do you guarantee if you implement a new release, you don't break your people, which breaks their service?
I mean, there are many elements to this, and it's very, very depending on the product, et cetera. But we do have ways to sort of do a narrow testing approach on certain policies, certain products, and that's what we employ inside Zscaler. So we're not, pushing it out to all of our employee base right away. There's a significant amount of testing that is done prior to that release in any case.
Right. This has been a wonderful conversation. I find this so interesting. I really enjoy all of the conversations we get to have together. And, in thinking about when we were preparing for this conversation that I've been looking forward to, I'd be remiss if we didn't touch on the fact, and kind of wrapping this all up, of you are a very successful woman in tech. Your role here leading the largest security cloud in the world from a CIO perspective, and all the other things you do. You're an advocate for gender equality in the industry. You have many organizations you're part of. For those young girls and young women out there who are aspiring where you are today, do you have any advice for them?
I would say, I think there's really two elements to this. One is I would encourage everyone to believe in their abilities, take on new charters and challenges, be curious. Just remember, breadth of experience is as important as depth of experience. So break barriers, constantly seek out new things. Sometimes you may think you're going to crash and burn. And I thought that plenty of times, but likely you'll surprise yourself. And most importantly, you're going to learn a lot. But above all, bring passion to anything you do and dream big. And imposter syndrome is real. Don't beat yourself about it. I think the second thing that I would say, beyond this, and I was in a recent panel for Women's History Month, and one of the panelists had something very compelling, and it really resonated with me, is just remember, if you're at a place in your career where you feel like appreciation isn't there, opt out of there. There's going to be plenty of places where there will be appreciation. And so make that call and have that confidence.
Take the leap of faith, because let's face it, so many of us have found ourselves in those situations, and we stayed because we were worried there wasn't going to be another opportunity, right? So leap of faith is wonderful. So did you ever take flying lessons?
I did. I took a lot of flight lessons. I have 120 hours of flying behind me. I've done all my solos. It was a wonderful time. And I will tell you that I never really thought my career track would change so much. And this is another thing for women to know, is that the best laid plans will still result in the best outcomes, even if they don't go as per what you planned when you were 18.
Yeah, this was not what I signed up for at 18 either.
Right, exactly.
It's funny. Yeah, life just takes you on its own journey, and to your point, embrace it and ride it out and see where you end up.
Yeah.
Praniti, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. Just really do enjoy our time together. So thank you.
It's always a pleasure to chat with you. This was great. Thank you so much.
And for all you out there, hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. Thank you all for listening to another episode of Cloudy with a Chance of Trust.
Thanks for listening to Cloudy with a Chance of Trust. Check back with your podcast provider regularly for more episodes. Statements by Zscaler podcasters and guests are informational only and should never be construed as legal advice. You should consult with your legal advisor on matters related to you or your business. Zscaler makes no warranties, express, implied, or statutory as to the content of this podcast, and it is provided as is. Content on this podcast may contain forward-looking statements that are current as of the date of recording and subject to change. These statements are subject to the safe harbor provisions created by the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. Full legal disclaimers are available at revolutionaries.zscaler.com. Copyright 2022.